When my husband's mother looked across the table and said, "He's not one of us," something in me broke. But what my son said next, what he said without raising his voice or shedding a single tear, left the entire room stunned, including me. That moment is etched into my memory like a scar, a clean, quiet wound, sharp enough to draw blood, soft enough that nobody else saw it. We were sitting at a long oak dining table, surrounded by wine glasses that barely touched, and smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. The table was dressed to impress. Polished silver, expensive candles, plates that probably came from some high-end registry. But beneath all that glitter, I could feel the cold. I should have trusted my gut. I should have known better than to expect warmth from a family that had never fully welcomed me or my son. My name is Zara. I'm 41, a mother, a wife, and by marriage, a member of the Caldwell family. My husband, Reed, is everything his family pretends to be: kind, grounded, thoughtful. He's the reason I ever set foot in their world in the first place. I met him when Malik, my son, was 4. Reed fell in love with us both. He said we were his family from the start, and I believed him. The problem was his family never did. They never said it outright, never told me to my face that I didn't belong. But they didn't have to. Sometimes silence screams louder than words. Sometimes it's in the way people barely make eye contact, or how they forget to include you in photos, or how they leave your child's name off the place cards. That night it was dinner at Reed's mother's home, a formal celebration for his new job promotion, a family gathering. Everyone was invited, everyone was expected to attend, and everyone did, including us. Malik was 13, polite, soft-spoken, and always observant. He wore the navy button-up I'd ironed the night before and tried to comb his curls just the way Reed does. He looked so grown, so hopeful. He didn't say it out loud, but I knew he was trying to be liked, trying to be included. I told him it would be okay. I told myself the same thing. And for the first few minutes, it was fine. People made small talk. Trina, Reed's sister, complimented Malik's shoes, then immediately turned to her own son to say, "We'll get you better ones this weekend." Her version of conversation always came with a sting. Reed poured wine, tried to keep things light. He made a joke about corporate life. His dad chuckled politely. Vivian, his mother, watched everything like a queen, overseeing a meal she'd long lost interest in. Then the topic shifted to family. Bloodlines. Someone made a joke about keeping things in the family. And Vivian, never one to miss a moment to slide a blade between the ribs with a smile, looked across the table at Malik and said, "Well, he's not really one of us anyway." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a joke. It was a statement. Sharp, deliberate, casual, like a wine stain she couldn't wait to wipe away. The words hung in the air. Reed froze mid-bite. Trina smirked. Her husband looked down at his plate. And me? I couldn't breathe. I looked at Malik. His fork hovered above his plate. He blinked slowly. His shoulders rose just enough to tell me he'd heard every word. And then he stood up. 13 years old. I'm barely 5'2". But in that moment, he stood taller than anyone else at that table. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He looked directly at Vivian and said something that would change everything. Something I'd never forget. "Good," he said, calm as stone. "Because I don't want to be part of you." Silence swept over the room like a strong wind that blew every fake smile away. No one moved. Forks hung in midair. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Vivian stared at him like she didn't understand what she had just heard, like the words were coming from a stranger and not the boy who had eaten her cooking, smiled at her door, said thank you every time he was offered something just to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. But Malik wasn't uncomfortable anymore. He was done shrinking. I don't want to be part of a family that makes people feel like garbage when they're trying their best, he continued. His voice didn't crack. It didn't waver. He wasn't speaking to start a fight. He was speaking to tell the truth. I've been trying to make you like me since I was 6, and I'm done. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest, not out of fear, but out of something else. Something unfamiliar. Something like pride and pain and release all crashing together at once. I looked at Reed. His hands were clenched on his lap. He wasn't looking at his mother. He was staring at Malik, watching him, really seeing him, in a way I hadn't seen Reed do in a long time. Vivian let out a small, nervous laugh. I didn't mean it like that, Malik. But he didn't flinch. He didn't let her off the hook. You did. And even if you didn't, you said it like you did. You always do. Trina cleared her throat, clearly trying to interrupt, trying to change the subject. But the moment was too thick, too undeniable. Then Malik turned toward Reed. His voice dropped slightly, quiet but clear. The kind of clear that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Dad, I know you love me, but you can't keep letting this happen. That sentence hung in the air like a hammer. Reed blinked. Something shifted behind his eyes. Like Malik had cracked something open in him that had been sealed far too long. That sentence didn't just hang in the air. It dropped like a stone into still water, and the ripples moved through every single person at that table. Dad, I know you love me, but you can't keep letting this happen. Reed sat very still. His jaw tightened. Those same warm, familiar eyes I had fallen in love with began to change. It was like watching a man wake up from a dream he had been too comfortable inside for far too long. Vivian, ever the performer, reached for her wine glass and let out a thin, controlled laugh. He's a child, she said, as if Malik wasn't standing right there, as if dismissing him was as natural as breathing. Reed, are you going to let your stepson speak to me like this at my own table? And that word, stepson, was the match she dropped into the gasoline. Reed put his fork down. Slowly. The kind of slow that isn't accidental. The kind of slow that says, I am choosing every single thing I do right now, or I might lose myself entirely. He's my son, Reed said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. Not my stepson. My son. And he just said the most honest thing anyone has said at this table in years. Trina set her glass down too fast. It clinked sharply. Reed? No. He said it once. Clean. Final. I had never heard that word come out of his mouth like that before. Not to his family. Not to Vivian. He had always been the peacekeeper. The one who smoothed things over, redirected the tension, changed the subject before anyone had to feel uncomfortable. He was the bridge between two worlds that probably never should have been connected in the first place. But that night, the bridge finally broke, and Reed was the one who broke it. He turned to his mother, not with rage, because Reed was never a man who raged. He turned to her with something far more devastating than anger. He turned to her with grief. I have spent 15 years watching you make my wife feel like a guest in this family, he said. 15 years watching you pretend Malik doesn't exist. 15 years telling myself that if I stayed quiet, if I kept the peace, things would eventually get better. He paused. They never did. And I kept letting it happen. So Malik's right. I am part of the problem. The room had gone so silent you could hear the candles flicker. Vivian's composure cracked. Just barely. A muscle twitched near her eye. I have always treated that boy with what, Mom? Reed asked. Tolerance. You've always tolerated us. That's not the same as love. That's not the same as family. Trina's husband finally moved. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair and muttered something about maybe giving everyone a moment. But no one left. Because even the people who had spent years looking away were now watching. They couldn't help it. They had never seen Reed like this. I looked at Malik. He was still standing. His arms weren't crossed. His chin wasn't down. He was watching his father speak, and I could see something happening in his eyes. Something delicate and enormous at the same time. Something like relief. I thought about all the years I had absorbed Vivian's cruelty quietly so that Malik wouldn't have to feel it. All the times I had smiled through gritted teeth and convinced myself I was protecting him. But children are not protected by silence. They are shaped by it. And somewhere along the way, Malik had learned to read every unspoken slight, every deliberate exclusion, every loaded pause. He had been absorbing it all. He just hadn't told me. That night, he told everyone. "We're leaving," Reed said, standing up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He pulled back his chair, folded his napkin, and extended his hand to me. I took it. Malik was already moving toward the door. Vivian tried one more time. "Reed, if you walk out of this house tonight, good night, Mom," he said, and we walked out. The drive home was quiet at first. The kind of quiet that isn't awkward. It's full, packed with things unsaid and things finally said, and the strange dizzy feeling of watching the world rearrange itself before your eyes. About 10 minutes in, Malik's voice came from the back seat. Soft, almost tentative. "Are you mad at me?" I turned around before Reed could even respond. "Absolutely not," I said. Not for a single second." Reed reached back and squeezed Malik's shoulder without taking his eyes off the road. "You said what needed to be said. I'm sorry it took you saying it for me to finally act." Malik looked out the window. "I wasn't trying to cause a problem." "You didn't cause one," Reed said. "You just stopped pretending one didn't exist." That night, after Malik had gone to bed, Reed and I sat at the kitchen table with cups of tea that went cold, because neither of us were really drinking them. And he said something I had been waiting years to hear. Not because I needed validation, but because it meant he finally saw it. "I failed you," he said. "Both of you. For a long time." I didn't tell him he was wrong, because he wasn't. But I also didn't let him sit in that guilt alone. "You're here now," I said. "Well, that's what counts." He nodded, but his eyes told me something else. They told me this wasn't over, that what had started at that table was just the beginning of a reckoning that had been a long time coming. I just didn't know how right he was. And before we go any further, if you're watching this right now and this story is hitting you somewhere deep, I want to say something directly to you. Stories like this one don't just exist in movies or on TV. They live in real homes, real families, real dinner tables, and the people living them often feel invisible. This channel exists so those voices get heard. So if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm, but because every time you subscribe, you're saying, these stories matter. These people matter. Now let's get back to Zara. Well, because what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The morning after, Vivian called. Twice before 9 a.m. Reed didn't answer the first time. The second time, he put the phone face down on the counter and let it ring out. He didn't look angry about it. He looked tired in a way that goes deeper than sleep, the kind of tired that comes from carrying something heavy for a very long time and finally putting it down. But Vivian was not a woman who accepted silence easily. When she couldn't reach Reed, she called Trina. And when Trina's account of the evening made its way through the family like water through dry soil, it came back to us changed, twisted in the way that only happens when someone needs to protect their own image. By that evening, the story had transformed. In Vivian's version, she had made a simple, innocent comment, and Malik had exploded, humiliated her in her own home while Reed stood by and allowed it. In her telling, she was the victim, the generous grandmother who had opened her home for a family celebration, only to be disrespected by a teenager who had never been properly raised. That word, properly, reached me through Reed's aunt, who called because she was concerned and wanted to give us a chance to explain ourselves. Explain ourselves, as if we owed the world an apology for refusing to be humiliated quietly. I won't pretend it didn't sting. It did. Even knowing the truth, there is something uniquely painful about having your character questioned by people who weren't even in the room, about watching your son be repackaged as the villain in a story where he was the one who had been wounded. Malik didn't know about any of it. We made sure of that. He went to school that week with the same quiet dignity he always carried. He did his homework. He made his lunch. He asked Reed if they could shoot hoops on Saturday, and Reed said yes before Malik had even finished the sentence. But Reed? Reed was not fine. He was calm on the surface. Steady, present, attentive. But I knew him. After 9 years of marriage, I could read the difference between Reed at peace and Reed processing. He was going through something private and enormous, and he was doing it the way men like him often do, quietly, methodically, alone. About 5 days after the dinner, he came home from work earlier than usual. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where we'd had tea that night, and he said, "I need to tell you something." I sat down across from him. I didn't say anything. I just waited. "I went through some old emails today," he began, "ones I hadn't thought about in years, from around the time we first started dating." I didn't know where this was going, but something in his voice made me go very still. "Do you remember when we almost didn't make it? That first year? When you pulled back and I didn't understand why?" I remembered. Of course I remembered. It had been one of the most confusing and painful stretches of our relationship. We had been falling in love, genuinely, deeply, and then suddenly something shifted. I had grown distant, cautious. I told Reed I wasn't sure we should continue. I had convinced myself I was protecting Malik from another attachment that might not last. But looking back, I had never fully understood what had triggered that fear so suddenly. "I found an email my mother sent you," Reed said. "From back then. The world stopped. She had your email from when you were coordinating Malik's birthday party. She used it." He paused. His hands were flat on the table, steadying himself. "She told you that I had been in a long-term relationship that had ended badly, that I wasn't ready to be a father figure, that getting involved with someone who had a young child would put unfair pressure on me, and you should consider whether it was fair to either of us." I sat very still. I could feel something moving through me slowly. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder than that. "She told you it wasn't personal," Reed continued, his voice low, "that she just cared about everyone's well-being, including Malik's." He looked at me. His eyes were raw. "She made it sound like she was doing you a favor." I thought back to that time. I thought about the creeping doubt that had settled over me like fog. I had assumed it was my own fear talking, my own old wounds about being a single mother, about whether I was asking too much of someone, whether Malik and I were too complicated a package for anyone to truly choose. I had spent months in my own head, quietly convincing myself that stepping back was the noble thing to do. But it wasn't my head that had planted those seeds. It was Vivian. She had reached into the most vulnerable part of my life and quietly, deliberately, tried to end us before we began. And when that didn't work, when Reed and I found our way back to each other anyway, she had spent the next decade making us feel the cost of choosing each other. Not in obvious ways, in the small, suffocating ways, the slights, the exclusions, the casual cruelties wrapped in politeness. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. What I felt instead was a strange, settling clarity, like a blurry image finally snapping into focus. Like every confusing, painful, inexplicable thing from the last 9 years had just rearranged itself into a shape I could finally see. "How long have you had this?" I asked. "I found it today," he said. "I promise you, Zara, I had no idea." And I believed him. Reed was not capable of layered deception. His flaw had been passivity, not cruelty. He had looked away when he should have looked closer, but he had never lied to me. He reached across the table and took my hand. "I am so sorry. For all of it. For everything she did, and for everything I didn't see." "What are you going to do?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that made every forced smile, every painful dinner, every silently swallowed hurt worth enduring. "I'm going to do what I should have done years ago," he said. "I'm going to make it right." Here's the thing about people like Vivian. They are very skilled at playing long games. They understand that a slow erosion is more effective than a direct attack. They understand that if you chip away at something quietly and consistently, a relationship, a person's confidence, a family's foundation, the damage looks like natural wear and time rather than deliberate destruction. And by the time anyone notices, there's plausible deniability built into every single move they made. She had done this for years, and she had done it beautifully, which is to say, invisibly. What she hadn't counted on was Reed finding that email. And what she really hadn't counted on was what Reed decided to do with it. He didn't call her screaming. He didn't fire off an angry message at midnight. He didn't tell Trina or his father or any member of the extended family. He did something far more deliberate. He asked for a meeting. Just him and Vivian. Alone. At her home. 1 week after the dinner. "You don't have to come," he told me. "This is between me and her." "I know," I said. "I don't want to be there, but I want to know everything after." He nodded. "You will." I spent that afternoon in a state of suspended stillness. Malik was at a friend's house. The apartment felt unusually quiet. I made tea. I seemed to be making a lot of tea lately. And I sat by the window and thought about who I had been when Vivian first came into my life. Young, hopeful, still carrying the raw tenderness of having navigated single motherhood for 4 years. So grateful that Reed had chosen us both. So eager to prove that we were worth choosing. And I thought about who Malik had been at the time. 4 years old, trusting. Wide-eyed in the way small children are when they walk into new spaces and try to decide whether they are safe. He had wanted so badly to be loved by them. He was a child. That was all he had ever been. The thought of Vivian looking at that small, hopeful boy and calculating how to keep him out, it moved through me like fire. Reed came home 3 hours later. He sat on the couch and leaned back and stared at the ceiling. I waited. "I showed her the email," he said. "What did she say?" "She said she'd written it out of love, that she was trying to protect me." He let out a long, slow breath. "Same thing she always says. Every hurtful thing she has ever done has been out of love, apparently." "What did you say?" He turned to look at me. "I told her that love doesn't interfere. Love doesn't manipulate. Love doesn't write secret emails to the woman your son is falling in love with to try to scare her away. And love, real love, doesn't spend a decade making a child feel like he doesn't belong in his own family." He paused. I told her I had been her accomplice for years without knowing it. That every time I kept quiet to keep the peace, I was making a choice. And the choice I was making was her. Over my own family. "How did she respond?" Reed's jaw tightened. "She cried. You know how she does it, where the tears come but the expression doesn't quite match. She said she never meant any harm. She said Malik had always been difficult to connect with. She said she had tried." "She never tried," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I know," he said. "I told her that too." "And then?" He looked at me with something I can only describe as quiet resolution. Not triumph, not bitterness, just finished. The look of a man who has closed a chapter he kept trying to rewrite. I told her that things were going to change. That if she wanted to be part of our lives, genuinely part of them, she was going to have to earn that. Not just with words, with actions. She was going to have to apologize. To you, to Malik. A real apology, not a justification dressed up as one. And she was going to have to show up differently, or not show up at all. I let that land. What did she say to that? She said she didn't think an apology was necessary because she didn't believe she had done anything wrong. The silence between us said everything. So that's where we are, he said. That's where we are, I agreed. And honestly, a year ago, that answer would have broken something in me. The confirmation that there was no magical conversation, no perfect set of words, no amount of grace that was going to open Vivian up into someone who could see us clearly and love us anyway. That had been my quiet hope for 9 years. And now it was gone. But here's the strange, unexpected thing about losing a hope you've held on to too long. The loss feels less like grief and more like freedom. She didn't believe she had done anything wrong. And that was her truth to carry, not mine. We were done carrying it for her. 3 weeks passed. Vivian did not call. Trina called twice, once to relay a message that Vivian was deeply hurt, and once to ask whether Reed had considered the impact of his choices on the whole family. Reed thanked her politely both times and changed nothing. His aunt, the one who had originally called about Malik being improperly raised, eventually reached out again. This time she had done her own quiet investigation. She had pulled Trina aside at some family gathering and asked for the real version of what happened that night. And Trina, caught off guard, had told something closer to the truth than the family had been working with. The aunt called Reed and said simply, "I owe your wife an apology, and I owe that boy one too." It was the first crack in the wall. Then came something I hadn't expected. Something from a direction I never would have predicted. Reed's father called. Quiet, reserved, perpetually diplomatic. This man had spent 40 years being Vivian's support beam and gentle counterbalance. I had never once heard him say anything that directly contradicted her. He called Reed on a Tuesday evening, and I could hear the murmur of his voice through the phone, but not the words. Later, Reed told me what he said. He said, "I've always known Vivian was hard on your wife. I told myself she'd come around. I told myself it wasn't my place to step in between a mother and her son. But I was wrong, Reed. I was wrong, and I'm sorry for it. That dinner, what she said to your boy in front of everyone, that wasn't just rude. It was cruel. And Malik deserved better. So did Zara." Reed's father. After 40 years of standing back, he had finally said it out loud. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgments carry the most weight. Not because they fix everything, they don't, but because they confirm that you weren't crazy, that what you felt was real, that the thing you tried to name for years actually had a name. I cried that night. The kind of cry that isn't dramatic. No heaving, no gasping. Just quiet tears that kept coming, the way rain does after a very long dry season. Malik didn't know any of this. We had kept the adult fallout carefully away from him. He knew he had spoken at that table. He knew his father had stood up for him. He knew we had left and hadn't gone back. But he didn't know about the email. He didn't know about Reed's conversation with Vivian. He didn't know about the phone calls. And for weeks, he hadn't mentioned the dinner at all. Not once. Until one Saturday morning when he was helping me make breakfast, something he did sometimes, not because I asked, but because he liked it, and out of nowhere he said, "Do you think she ever actually liked me? Even a little?" He was cracking eggs into the bowl. He didn't look up. His voice was casual, in the way teenagers are casual about things that are not casual at all. I set down the spatula and turned toward him. Honestly, he finally looked at me. Yeah, I think she didn't know you, I said. And I think that was her failure, not yours. He nodded slowly. Went back to the eggs. I used to think if I was just good enough, polite enough, if I tried harder, she'd eventually just see me. He paused. And then I realized she saw me the whole time. She just decided what she thought before she even looked. I stood there in my kitchen, looking at my son, and I thought, this boy, this quiet, observant, clear-eyed boy. He had understood something it takes most adults years of therapy to untangle. That's exactly right, I told him, and that's not something you could have fixed, no matter how good you were. He nodded again, and then he smiled. Small, a little sad, but real. At least I know it wasn't me. It was never you, I said. Reed walked in right at that moment, fresh from his morning run, slightly out of breath. He looked between us, sensed something had passed between us, and without asking a single question, walked over to Malik and put both hands on his shoulders. You all right? He asked. Malik looked up at him. Yeah, he said. I think I actually am. And Reed pulled him in, one of those firm, no-nonsense hugs that fathers give when words are too small. And Malik, who was 13 and usually rolled his eyes at affection, leaned into it. I turned back to the stove so they wouldn't see me fall apart. That was the moment I realized something. That awful dinner had not been a tragedy. It had been a turning point. Not just for Reed and his mother, not just for our relationship with the Caldwell family, but for Malik himself. Because sometimes the wound that finally breaks open is the one that finally lets everything breathe. My son had spent years trying to earn something that was never his to earn. And in one quiet moment, standing at a formal dinner table at 13 years old, he had simply stopped. He had chosen his own dignity over their approval, and in doing so, he had given the rest of us permission to do the same. You cannot put a price on that. About 6 weeks after the dinner, Vivian came to our home. No call ahead, no arrangement. She simply rang the doorbell on a Sunday afternoon when the three of us were all home, Reed finishing some work in the study, Malik playing guitar in his room, and me reading on the couch. When I looked through the peephole and saw her standing there in her good coat, holding what appeared to be a small wrapped gift, I held my breath for just a moment. Then I opened the door. She looked older than I remembered. And I know that's a strange thing to say about someone I had seen just weeks earlier. But something in her bearing had shifted. The imperious certainty she usually carried like armor was still there. But there were cracks in it now. Visible ones. Zara, she said, I'd like to speak with Reed. And with Malik. If that's all right? I didn't say anything right away. I let the moment breathe. Because this, Vivian showing up at my door, asking permission, was something I had never seen before, and something that deserved to be recognized for exactly what it was. Come in, I said. See, Reed came out of the study when he heard the door. His face was careful, unreadable. He looked at his mother, then at me. I gave him the smallest nod. I'll get Malik, I said. I went to his room and knocked. He was mid-chord on his guitar when I opened the door. Your grandmother is here, I said. She says she wants to talk to you. You don't have to if you don't want to. He set the guitar down. Thought for a moment. What does she want? I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I'll be right there the whole time. And if you want to leave, you just say so, and we leave. No argument. He stood up. Okay. We walked into the living room together. Vivian was sitting on the edge of the armchair, not leaning back, not settling in. She was perched, like someone who knew she hadn't earned the right to get comfortable yet. She looked at Malik for a long moment. He met her eyes steadily, calm and clear, just like he had been at the dinner table. I owe you an apology, Vivian said. Her voice was not entirely steady. What I said at dinner was wrong. It was unkind. and it should not have been said. She paused, and I could see the effort it took, a woman of her pride and age, to hold that moment without qualifying it or explaining it away. I've been telling myself for a long time that I was being honest, or realistic, or protective of my son. But the truth is, I was being narrow and stubborn, and I let my own limitations determine how I treated you. That wasn't fair. Malik listened. He didn't soften immediately. He didn't smile or say, "It's okay." He wasn't giving her an easy exit, but he also wasn't hardening against her. He was just listening, the way only certain people truly know how to. Then he said, "I appreciate that. Not, I forgive you. Not, don't worry about it. Just, I appreciate that." Which was, honestly, exactly the right response. It acknowledged what she had done without pretending it hadn't happened. It accepted the apology without erasing the wound. Vivian nodded. Something moved through her expression. Something that might have been respect. She placed the wrapped gift on the coffee table. "I don't expect everything to be fine right away," she said. "I just didn't want to keep waiting to say what I should have said." Reed spoke then. "That matters, Mom. It does." She stood to leave. I walked her to the door, and just before she stepped out, she turned to look at me, eye to eye, which she almost never did. I wrote you that email a long time ago," she said. Her voice was low, just for me. I thought I was being reasonable. Looking back, I wasn't. I was afraid of losing him, afraid of things changing, and I took that out on the wrong people." I held her gaze. "You did," I said. Not harshly, but clearly. "I know," she said. And then she walked to her car. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment alone. Was it enough? Was one apology enough for years of quiet erosion? For the email that had almost ended everything before it began? For the place cards with Malik's name left off year after year? I didn't know, and that was an honest answer. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a light switch. It's more like a season. It comes slowly, unevenly, and it looks different depending on the day. But a door that had been sealed for 9 years had, for the first time, opened just slightly. And that was something. Here is what people don't tell you about moments of confrontation. They don't tell you that the aftermath is slower and quieter and more complicated than the moment itself. They sell you the image of the dramatic showdown, the tearful apology, the reconciliation, the family gathered back together in warm resolution. What they leave out is all the Tuesday evenings after, all the regular, undramatic work of rebuilding trust when trust has been broken in so many small, layered, invisible ways. Our lives did not transform overnight. Vivian did not become the grandmother Malik had wished for as a 6-year-old. Reed did not wake up unburdened of 15 years of impossible terrain. Oh, I did not stop tensing slightly every time the phone rang with an unknown number. But things shifted. Slowly, genuinely, in ways that could not be faked. Vivian came to Malik's school concert 2 months later. She sat in the 3rd row with Reed's father, who had already been quietly building a different kind of relationship with Malik in the weeks since. Small texts, asking about school, asking about the guitar. Things that didn't seem like much but meant everything. During the concert, Malik played a piece he had been working on for months, something he had written entirely himself. When it ended, Reed's father stood up first, and Vivian, after a brief pause, stood too. Malik saw them from the stage. His expression didn't break into a wide grin. He didn't get emotional. He simply gave a small, acknowledging nod, the kind that says, "I see you. You showed up. We'll see where it goes from here." That was enough. That was more than enough. Trina took longer. She was a more complicated creature, not malicious the way her mother had been, but conflict avoidant in a way that had made her a bystander, and bystanders have consequences too. She reached out to me eventually, about 4 months after the dinner. Not with a big gesture or a formal apology, but with a text that said, "I've been thinking about some things. I haven't always been a good sister-in-law. I'd like to do better if you'll let me." I held that text for a long time before responding. Then I wrote back, "I'd like that too." We weren't friends. We might never be. But we were family. Complicated, imperfect, figuring it out as we go family. And that was a thing worth trying to honor. Reed changed in ways I had hoped for, but never dared fully expect. He became more present in the small moments, not just the big decisions, but the everyday ones. He started saying no to family obligations that didn't serve us and yes to the ones that did. He stopped saying, "That's just how she is," and started saying, "That's not acceptable." He started advocating for Malik the way a father advocates, clearly, visibly, without apology. And Malik, my son, my quiet, observant, extraordinary son, continued to be exactly who he had always been. Except now he carried himself a little differently. Not with arrogance or defensiveness, but with something that looked a lot like ease. The particular ease that comes when you stop performing for people who will never truly see you and start simply being yourself for the ones who do. He's 14 now. He still plays guitar. He still laughs at Reed's terrible jokes. He still asks me on Sunday mornings if we can make the pancakes with the blueberries, and I always say yes. He doesn't bring up that dinner much, but once, a few months ago, when we were driving home from a late movie and the car was dark and everyone was in that half-awake, unguarded state, he said from the back seat, "I'm glad I said it." I looked at Reed. Reed looked at me. "Me too," I said. "Me too," said Reed. And that was all that needed to be said. I want to leave you with something. Not a neat bow on a messy story. Not a declaration that everything is perfect now, because it isn't. Yeah, but something true. For years I believed that if I was patient enough, gracious enough, if I kept showing up with enough softness and enough silence, that acceptance would eventually come. That belonging was something I could earn, or wait out, or gently coax from people who withheld it. What I learned, what a 13-year-old boy taught me at a dinner table in front of people who had underestimated him his entire life, is that belonging is not given to you. It is not something another person can grant or revoke. Belonging begins when you decide that your presence in this world has value regardless of whether the people around you have recognized it yet. Malik did not win that dinner by humiliating anyone or starting a war. He simply stopped pretending. He stopped performing patience for people who had never offered him patience in return. He said, clearly and calmly, "I don't need what you're not willing to give." That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, one of the most radical and most difficult things a person can do. We live in a world that rewards endurance. That tells us staying quiet is dignified. That tells us maintaining peace, even peace built on someone else's comfort at the expense of your own dignity, is the noble choice. But there is a difference between dignity and silence. There is a difference between grace and erasure. My son knows that now. He knew it at 13, which means I still have a lot to learn from him. If you are someone sitting at a table right now where you feel invisible, where your name keeps getting left off the list, so where your presence is tolerated instead of embraced, where you keep trying to earn something that should not require earning, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to stand up. You are allowed to name what is happening. You are allowed to say, "This is not acceptable, and I deserve better than this." You don't have to yell. You don't have to create a scene. You can be calm, you can be clear, and you can walk away with your head up. The table will still be there, but you don't have to keep sitting at it. For our family, things are different now. Not perfect, not fully healed, not without complicated moments, but different, more honest, more grounded, built on something real instead of something polished. And when I sit at my own table, the small, ordinary one in our kitchen, I'm with the chipped edge and the mismatched chairs, I feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I feel like I'm home. Thank you for watching this story all the way through. If this hit you somewhere deep, if you know someone who needs to hear it, share it with them. And if you're new here, every story on this channel is told with the same intention: to remind you that your story matters, that what you've been through matters, that you are not alone. Subscribe if you haven't. Drop a comment below. Tell me which part hit you hardest. I read every single one. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.